Steve Mosby is a great guy. He's a terrific friend to so many people in the crime and thriller world. And I think he's a really good writer. He deserves to be a lot better known than he currently is, and I'm sure that's going to happen. Big welcome, Steve, to the Author Studio.
I always feel unqualified to give writing tips because everybody writes really differently. I mean, the one that I've always found best is to not necessarily write every day, but keep writing, keep going with that first draft. Because there's an old saying, you know, you can edit a full draft that's rubbish, but you can't edit an empty page. It's really good. Half the battle is turning up, you know, and writing as much as possible. And then you can change it all later. Don't worry about that. Just get on with it and get it done. I'd probably pick two. 50/50 Killer did quite well for me, and it was a point when I'd just become redundant from my job, and it allowed me to become a full-time writer, which I've been able to be ever since. And I think that was the point where I figured out what I wanted to do with my writing, and everything sort of clicked into place a little bit. Even though it's not perfect, but I kind of figured out what I wanted to do. And then Black Flowers a little bit later on, it just felt like, you know, that the finished book kind of accomplished what I really wanted to do with it. So I'd pick those two, but 50/50 Killer. I write in the afternoons, and I write in a pub in Leeds called the Packhorse Brigade. And it started when my son was born, 6 years ago now, and I just couldn't write in the house with him and my wife around. I needed the kind of privacy of getting out and having my own space. So I write in pubs in Leeds, basically. In the afternoons, I kind of go to the gym in the morning, write a couple of thousand words in the afternoon, and go home. Now, you see, that's an incredibly difficult question. It's very difficult to pin anything down. All I could really do would be to think of individual writers rather than books necessarily. When I was much younger, a writer called Diana Wynne Jones wrote these wonderful fantasy novels for kids. There was one called The Power of Three, which I read again recently, and it's just a wonderful example of storytelling. And that kind of, it had that magic to it. I loved all of her stuff. And then as I got older, obviously the usual sort of horror-y people like Dean Koontz, Stephen King, clearly Stephen King. And then as I got older again, moving into more slipstream literary works, and finally into kind of crime, crush-on crime stuff. Mo Hayder, especially, I really love Mo Hayder. You know, in a sense, anything that brings you pleasure you shouldn't necessarily feel guilty about. So it's not like reading a particular kind of thing. I think that, you know, so much stuff gets denigrated as trash, and that's wrong, because if it brings people pleasure, who cares? You know, so I never feel guilty about that kind of thing. I suppose kind of like a more serious answer, stuff like, I don't know, if there was rap music with like kind of really homophobic or misogynistic lyrics and everything like that, but I still quite like it for some reason. It's good to exercise to, kind of feel guilty about listening to that, but you know, still sort of enjoy it on some sort of terrible level. Not precisely a ritual. When I start a new book, I tend to do lots of notes beforehand. Often I do them on the computer, but I really like to have a kind of visual guide as well. So I will tend to buy a very nice new notepad and a pack of pens. And I want a fresh notepad every time I start a book, and I'll just sort of gradually fill it with notes. Often not just color-coded and everything like that, but not just written, but kind of like little squares, things, arrows going everywhere. You know, here's an arc, here's a different character arc, here's the different bits of the stories fitting in. And I always like to have a fresh notepad when I do that. So, you know, it's a trip to the stationery store. I can spend ages actually at a stationery store, because it's like, you know, it's amazing. You know, looking at all the notepads and everything, I kind of geek out a bit. So that's what I'll do, is I'll buy a new notepad. Yes, yeah, as long as I can remember. When I was a little kid, I used to read a lot. My mum would take A4 sheets and she would fold them over and she would sew the lining and ask me to write stories in them. And I would write choose your own adventure books and things like that from the very beginning. And you know, that's all I actually wanted to do. I remember taking a maths exam when I was 11 at school, failing it miserably, and thinking to myself, it's all right, because you don't want to do maths, you want to be a writer, that's what you're going to be. So I wrote my first book, finished my first book when I was 17, submitted it, dreadful, obviously dreadful, and then submitted a number of other books until I finally got published when I was 26. But that was all I ever wanted to do, was to write. So there's kind of plotters and pantsers, isn't there? You know, that's what they say. You know, people who plot it all out in advance and people who just wing it. And I'm somewhere between the two. I like to plan it out a bit in advance. I like to have an idea of what I'm doing. I like to have a good sort of sense of the idea behind the book, what I'm writing about, what the subject matter is, what the theme is, and everything like that. And then I try and plan as much as possible. But I always think of my first draft. And this isn't my phrase, but somebody else would refer to a draft zero, you know, so you're not just writing a first draft, you're writing a draft zero, something that can be so rubbish that nobody will ever see it. And I kind of think of it as like sort of you know, almost like taking a camera out with a bunch of mates and an idea and just filming a load of scenes, and then when you get it back and look at all the footage, you've got your zero draft, and then you can begin to think, right, I need this actor for this part, I need to reshoot this in this area, and you get an idea of the structure of the thing. So I write I don't care about my first draft, I just want to get it down, and then I figure out the book that I should write. So I do draft after draft after draft, and it slowly comes into focus. That one, it's that one. I mean, the obvious one, I suppose, is where you get your ideas. I mean, everybody's going to say that, aren't they? So, you know, I suppose I'd have to go with that, but I don't really hate it. I don't hate being asked any questions. I'm happy to answer anything. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I don't know. It's sure something happens to me. You know, something. It'll either be an event in my life, or it'll be an event in my friend's life, or it'll be something I read about in the news. Something that just resonates in your head. You know, these things will happen and they stick with you, and you just can't get them out. They niggle away at you until you kind of feel like you need to write a story about them. You need to figure out how you feel about them, and that's where ideas come from. Just things that happen. You know, you need to get out and experience stuff, read stuff, talk to people, and eventually things begin to stick and coalesce and become the idea for a story. No, actually I haven't. I had a draft saved on a memory stick, which I lost in the middle of Leeds Millennium Square during a party one time. I had a backup, but then it was like a nearly finished book, and I had nightmares for a while that somebody was going to find the memories. It wasn't protected or anything like that, and like self-publish it or something like that. But fortunately, I got there first. So.
Thanks very much, Steve, for coming to the Author's Studio. That was filmed in Harrogate, where you've been a past chair and also a past writer-in-residence. We've all learnt a lot. Thank you. Stay tuned for more to come.